that an Ebola staged false flag attack was coming. So we're going to drill down. We're going to ask him if what we're seeing now with the Ebola outbreak is what he characterized during his appearance on the Alex Jones show last month. But there's an interesting article, given that we've reported numerous times the threat that the Ebola virus could mutate and go airborne to at least a limited extent. Experts worry virus may spread more easily than assumed. This is out of the LA Times. Dr. C.J. Peters, who battled a 1989 outbreak of the virus among research monkeys housed in Virginia, and who later led the CDC's most far-reaching study of Ebola's transmissibility in humans, said he would not rule out the possibility that it spreads through the air in tight quarters. Quote, "We just don't have the data to exclude it," said Peters, who continues to research viral diseases at the University of Texas in Galveston. So, David, you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, Paul, we're seeing two different types of responses. We're seeing a medical response and we're seeing a political response. And on the political side, it has been downright reckless. That's why we've run articles saying that they're standing down, that they're doing everything that they can to spread this. It goes way beyond just trying to keep people from panicking and not spreading fear. What they're doing is putting people recklessly at risk the way that they're portraying this. And I think the person that best represents this is the guy who really is at the center of what's happening in Dallas, and that's this Judge Jenkins up there. He also he's a district county judge. He's somebody that first kind of came to light back in the summer. He was trying to get thousands of children, as they were saying at the time. They had all these unaccompanied children, young children with teddy bears coming across the border by themselves, making the thousands of miles journey across the border. So he was going to house them, and he very notably went door to door intimidating people about not protesting this, saying that they weren't going to put up with any protests of people bringing that in. That got him a seat across the table when Obama came to Dallas, even though Rick Perry was seated at the far end of the table. An interesting picture that you can find of that, where you can see the expression on Perry's face. But the bottom line is this guy is a rabid pro-illegal immigration advocate. He's up for election in a couple of weeks, and he's been telling people that there is no risk, and he's been the one who's been issuing the quarantine orders quite a bit late, but then also going into the apartment, making a big show of the fact that he's going in without any protective clothing, going to a press conference afterwards and saying, "I'm wearing the same shirt that I went in and hung out with them in the apartment, and then I transported them and their belongings in my personal car for 45 minutes. And I'm wearing the same shirt at this press conference that I wore with them. I'm not afraid of this. There is no risk," is what he said. That's his quote. "There is no risk." Well, the reality of it is that the materials in the apartment, just as they quarantined the ambulance because it might be contaminated, just as they tracked down that homeless man and under this judge's orders put him under quarantine, they tracked him down not once but twice. They brought him in once and they tested him. They didn't find any symptoms. He then subsequently left. They did another manhunt to bring him back and then put him under isolation. So we're seeing a very schizophrenic approach to this, but he goes out and tells people that there is no risk. Well, the reality is that you can come down with it. It's been reported by the New York Times. You can catch it from materials, and it is present for up to hours or sometimes days, depending on the material, depending on the condition, whether it's exposed to sunlight. He was so late in doing anything at the apartment that he may very well have not exposed himself to any risk. But what he is doing is modeling reckless behavior for the people in America that might come into contact with this. You know, the cemeteries in Liberia are filled with the bodies of people who never thought they could get Ebola. And so what he's doing is a big disservice to people. This virologist, Dr. Philip K. Russell, who was part of that experiment, I'm sorry, he was not one of the persons who was part of that experiment. He's with the U.S. Army's Medical Research Development. He says to be dogmatic is, I think, ill-advised because there are too many unknowns here. Now, there was another guy who was part of that experiment that you referred to where the monkeys got out of control, and his name is Charles Bailey. He supervised the response, and he said what he learned from the episode informs his suspicion that the current strain of Ebola that is afflicting humans might be spread through tiny liquid droplets propelled into the air by coughing or sneezing. In other words, by aerosols, which is exactly what they were doing the other day when they were pressure washing without any protective equipment the area where he had thrown up on the sidewalk, not cordoning it off from the public. Then the next day they send in a hazmat team to clean the apartment. That's the kind of inconsistency, the kind of nonsense that we're seeing, the difference between the medical response and the political response.
And of course, we had the University of Illinois study, which I reported on a few days ago, which, again, they were talking about the potential aerial transmissibility of the Ebola virus. They were saying that it could transmit more than 3 feet, which is the current understanding with people coughing and sneezing. So,
yeah, we have that, and we have the Canadian study that you had talked about, and what this guy continues to say about these monkeys that were dying of Ebola. He said they were dying in a pattern that was certainly suggestive of coughing and sneezing, some sort of aerosol movement. They were dying and spreading it so quickly from cage to cage that we finally came to the conclusion the best action was to euthanize them all. That's the way they stopped it.
And of course, I mean, we had the Public Health Agency of Canada. They admitted on their website, as of August, that was the last time it appeared on the website, that Ebola, they strongly suspected, I believe the exact words were, that Ebola had gone airborne in humans, at least to a limited extent. That was subsequently censored in light of the most recent spate of outbreaks in Western Africa, and they completely deleted that information from their website altogether. So, I mean, David, do you think this process of deleting information, which we've seen in a couple of other cases, in fact, the German virologist who went public and said that basically this wouldn't end until the population of Liberia was basically wiped out. He talked about 5 million dead. His quotes were later removed from that article when we highlighted them in an Infowars.com article. So, I mean, David, do you think this attempt to remove information is part of a deliberate cover-up, or is it just a botched attempt to prevent hysteria?
It is a deliberate cover-up, I believe. It goes beyond just trying to control hysteria. Look, he could control hysteria by telling people, educating people so that they would understand what their risks were. If he wants to go into the apartment and he wants to tell people that I think it's safe because it's been so many days, but instead he just says there's nothing to worry about. There is zero risk. And they're like you pointed out, they're removing information. They're also pushing this narrative that we're going to somehow be saved by pharmaceuticals. If you look at the article that's up on USA Today, and I'm trying to find it here in my stack of articles. I've got so much information here, but basically what they were focusing on was the various times that people have been given experimental drugs. What they don't tell you is that Dr. Kent Brantley and the lady that was also working with him, who were both given ZMapp, who both recovered. I don't know about her, but he was definitely given a blood transfusion at the same time that he received that experimental drug. 2 others were also given that experimental drug. One of them, and they both died in other countries. One of them was a Spanish priest, where now we see that Ebola has transferred to somebody for the first time outside of Africa. So not only did he die, but now there's one person. There was reports yesterday about a possible second person. I don't know if that's changed or not yet. But at least one person has contracted Ebola there, and that was from a patient who was treated with ZMapp and subsequently died. Now, there's another experimental drug that was used on another doctor that was different from that. He subsequently was cured, but he also received a blood transfusion. He was sent a blood transfusion from Dr. Kent Brantley, the fellow who recovered, because he had received that transfusion from a patient that he had treated in Liberia. He sent that to him. So that doctor also received a blood transfusion from someone who had recovered, who had antibodies in their plasma. And at the same time that he got the experimental drug, now he is back in the hospital. They were saying that it is not a recurrence of Ebola. They weren't saying exactly what it was, but today, it was interesting, in this USA Today article, they said the FDA has blocked any further trials of that drug because it produces some severe flu-like symptoms. So it may be that it is secondary side effects of that drug, that maybe it did cure him of Ebola, but there are these secondary side effects. And then there's this new drug that they're using on Mr. Duncan in Dallas, the Liberian patient. And that is a drug that they have used in the past to treat viruses. And although it has killed it in vitro in a glass, there is absolutely no evidence that it has been responsive in treating it in people. And I don't know if they've done any animal testing or not. So that's really kind of a wild shot that they're just putting out there.
So, I mean, in 2009 with the swine flu, we saw this huge hysteria. There were reports of potentially troops on the streets in reaction to this hysteria which could occur. The difference then is they had the the drug, the vaccine lined up, and everybody took it, even though only elderly, sick, and young people were at risk of contracting swine flu. So for the large majority of the population, of the global population, that wasn't a threat. At the time, they played it up like it was doomsday, like it was the end of the world. With the Ebola crisis here, we've seen a slow burn. Do you think, David, that they're really going to ramp up the hysteria once they get a drug in place, whether it's effective or not?
I absolutely believe that's what they're waiting for. And as a matter of fact, we covered last week in the nightly news, there was information that the Gates Foundation and several pharmaceutical companies were coming together to mass produce the ZMapp vaccine, the one that is basically had a 50% success rate so far. And you can't necessarily even say that it's that high because, as I pointed out, at least one of the patients who recovered, one of the two, had also received a blood transfusion, but they are ramping up to produce that massively. And of course, that is something that is genetically, there's a lot of genetic modification, transgenetic modification going on.